On a dusty boardwalk, a father and brother tried to sell their daughter to the highest bidder. The crowd jeered, coins clinked, and shame hung heavy, until a quiet mountain man stepped forward. He refused to claim her as property. Instead, he offered something no one else would, the right to choose. She left with him, but the choice would be tested by winter storms, kin who returned with cattle deals, and a tempting offer down the mountain. When survival and freedom pulled in opposite directions, which path would she take? The town of Dusty Creek was never quiet for long. Wagons rattled across the hard-packed street, spurs clinked on the boardwalk, and rough laughter spilled from the saloon. But on this afternoon, the noise carried a sharper edge. A crowd had gathered outside Carson's tavern, where two men, father and son, pushed a young woman forward as though she were no more than a mule for trade. "Step up, girl," her brother barked, his hand firm on her elbow. "Let's get this over with." She stumbled on the warped plank, catching herself with quick hands. The jeering crowd pressed closer. The tavern keeper, a greasy man with a paunch that stretched his vest buttons, licked his lips and jangled coins in his palm. "She's strong enough," the father boasted, his voice loud enough to carry. "Knows her way around a stove and a wash tub. Could have her working by sundown." The girl, barely 20, stood rigid, eyes darting anywhere but the faces circling her. She had learned long ago that dignity was a dangerous thing to hold, yet she kept her chin from bowing, even as the tavern keeper reached out as though to test the goods. It was then that a voice, low but firm, cut through the noise. "Leave her be." The crowd shifted. A man stepped from the shadow of the livery stable, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat worn from years and weather. He carried no gun at his hip, only a satchel of furs and leather slung across his back. His eyes, gray as river stone, fixed steady on the sellers. "Who are you to meddle?" the brother sneered. The stranger set the satchel down with deliberate calm. "Name's Elias Turner. I trap up in the high country. I've come to town for salt and tools, not a spectacle." He nudged the satchel with his boot. "That's worth more than you're dealing. Take it if you want, but the girl chooses where she goes." The tavern keeper scowled. "Ain't how business works." "Then it ain't business," Elias replied. The girl's father bristled, cheeks red with drink and shame. "She's ours to sell. Debt's gotta be paid." Elias's gaze didn't waver. "She ain't property. She's flesh and breath same as you." He turned to the girl, his tone gentler. "Choice is yours. Stay here or come with me. Shelter's all I offer. Freedom's the rest." For a moment, silence stretched thin. The girl's heart thudded loud enough she thought the crowd might hear. No one had ever spoken of choice as though it belonged to her. Her brother spat into the dust. "Go on, then. See if a mountain hermit treats you better." The girl lifted her chin. "I will." Gasps rippled through the crowd. She stepped to Elias's side, her step small but sure. Without a word, he shouldered the satchel, guided her toward a waiting mule, and together they walked past the gawkers. The father cursed under his breath, but neither he nor the tavern keeper moved to stop them. Pride wounded deeper than coin, they let the girl walk away. Out beyond the edge of town, the sounds of laughter and jeers faded. Wind swept across the valley, carrying the smell of pine from the distant ridges. The girl drew a breath that felt like the first in years. "You got a name?" Elias asked as they rode slow toward the mountains. "Clara," she answered, voice steadier than she felt. "Clara," he repeated, as though fixing it in his memory. "All right, then. Timber's thin this year, but I've got canvas enough to keep out the rain. You'll be safe." Safe. The word sounded fragile on her tongue. She glanced back once at the town shrinking behind them, then forward to the dark line of timber. The road ahead was unknown, but for the first time, it was hers to take. But freedom carries its own test. High country timber meant cold nights, thin shelter, and a man who spoke little but kept his word. Could trust grow there, or would the wind strip it bare? The trail climbed out of the valley into a world quieter than Clara had ever known. The pines rose tall and close, their scent sharp against the thin air. Rocks jutted like bones from the earth, and each mile seemed to test whether she truly meant to leave Dusty Creek behind. Elias Turner rode steady, saying little. He led a pack mule loaded with the satchel of furs, tools, and a roll of canvas. By late afternoon, when her legs trembled from the long ride, he guided her into a clearing tucked between ridges. "This is it," he said simply. The place hardly looked like a home. A rough frame of timbers leaned half-built. Smoke-black stones marked an old fire ring, and a few boards lay scattered in the grass. No porch, no roof, no comfort, only work waiting to be done. Clara swallowed, folding her arms tight around herself. She had left behind a jeering crowd, but now faced a wilderness that offered nothing but raw ground. Elias handed her a water skin. "Canvas will keep the rain off tonight. You take it. I'll sleep outside." She blinked. "Why would you?" "Because you need rest more than me," he said, already unrolling the bundle. His voice held no edge, no expectation. That evening, he served her beans from a small iron pot, placing the bowl in her hands before filling his own. They ate by the fire, sparks rising into the dark. He asked nothing of her. He spoke only once, quietly. "I was married once. Fever took her. Haven't had company since." Clara hesitated, unsure how to answer. She only nodded and whispered, "I'm sorry." He gave the smallest shrug, as if to say sorrow was no stranger in the high country. Days slid into rhythm. Elias rose at dawn, swinging an axe through pine until the sound echoed off the ridges. Clara fetched water, her arms aching, her skirts soaked from splashes. She hauled stones to stack into the hearth, fingers blistering. Together they packed mud between logs, sealing the walls. Each task felt like proof she could belong to something not built on contempt or barter. At night, they sat near the fire. He whittled small shapes from pine knots. She asked questions. What wood was best for a roof beam? Why stones cracked in fire? He answered plainly, never laughing at her ignorance. She realized, slowly, he was teaching without ever calling it teaching. Clara had lived where learning was punished and silence expected. Now, each day's labor was matched with a small piece of dignity, as if the mountain itself was granting her a new spine. On the fourth evening, she watched him plane a rough plank into something straight. "Why do you work so careful?" she asked. "Because wood remembers," Elias said. "Do it right, it lasts. Do it wrong, it'll fail when you need it most." She held the thought close, wondering if hearts remembered the same way. The cabin rose slowly, rafters stretched across the frame, the roof began to shed rain. Clara planted a line of wildflowers by the steps, a small rebellion against years when her worth had been measured in coin. When she looked at the cabin, she saw not a prison but a choice made visible. One night, as wind rattled the canvas, she whispered, "Why did you stand for me in town?" Elias paused before answering. "Because nobody else would, and because choice don't mean much until someone honors it." She lay awake long after, staring into the dark, the word choice echoing like a promise. And maybe that's the question worth asking. If you had stood on that boardwalk in Dusty Creek, would you have honored her choice too? Tell me in the comments. But trust, once sparked, must grow. The next test would come not from kin or strangers, but from letters written in charcoal in a cabin that slowly became something more. By the third week in the high country, Clara had learned the rhythm of the place. Morning meant the ring of Elias's axe. Midday brought aching arms from hauling water or stones. Evening was firelight, the smell of pine smoke clinging to her dress, and a silence that was not cruel but steady. The cabin was rising, walls tight with chinking, roof beams laid true. Each log felt like a stake driven against the life she had left behind. But the cabin was not the only thing taking shape. Clara herself was changing. One evening, Elias took a piece of pine board and a stub of charcoal from the fire's edge. He wrote a single word across the wood in slow, careful strokes. "Clara." She frowned. "What good is that?" "Good as knowing your own name," he said, pushing the board toward her. "Trace it." Her hand shook at first, but she followed the lines until the letters belonged to her. She tried again and again, smudging charcoal across her fingers, until she could write it without his guide. For the first time, her name was something she held, not something shouted at her. Each night after, Elias wrote another letter or word. Bread, wood, sky. She copied them by firelight, whispering the sounds under her breath. He never hurried her, never scolded when she stumbled, only nodded when she got it right. "I never thought learning was for me," she admitted once. Back home, words weren't worth the trouble. A girl was better off silent. Elias's eyes flicked toward her, the firelight catching the lines at their corners. "World's full of folks who'd rather keep others silent. That don't mean they're right." Clara stared at the board, then back at him. His voice carried no sermon, no pity, only truth. It sank into her deeper than she expected. By day, the work hardened her. She split wood with a small axe, fingers blistering but proud of the pile she stacked. She swept the new floor until it shone pale in the lamplight. She planted wildflowers in a line by the steps, a rebellion against the harshness of rock and timber. By habit, a small table in the corner became a place for her lessons. Charcoal boards piled beside it, words scratched and re-scratched. It looked almost like a schoolroom, though no children filled it yet. "You think children will ever come?" she asked one night, glancing at the table. Elias shrugged. "Cabin'll hold them, if it does. For now, it holds us." Clara smiled faintly. She had never known a home built with respect instead of barter. It changed the way she carried herself. Shoulders straighter, chin no longer bowed. She realized she was learning not just letters, but a new kind of spine. Still, doubts lingered. One afternoon, while they squared the doorframe, she asked, "Why do you bother teaching me? I slow the work." Elias adjusted the hinge, his movements precise. "Because you're more than work, and because a home's more than logs and nails. It's who lives inside it." The answer lodged in her chest. She said nothing, but later, when she set a flower on the sill, she felt it was the first thing she'd ever planted that might truly grow. As the sun dropped, painting the sky with bands of red and gold, Clara looked out from the doorway of the nearly finished cabin. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain. For the first time, she wasn't bracing for what others demanded of her. She was ready to choose. But the past has a way of riding trails no one guards. When her kin returned with cattle deals and jeers, the doorway of the new cabin would become her witness stand. The cabin stood nearly whole by late summer. Its walls held against rain, the roof no longer leaked, and Clara's wildflowers had taken root by the steps. She swept the floor each morning, proud of the shine she coaxed from rough pine boards. At night, she read her halting words from charcoal slates while Elias shaped wood into stools and shelves. The place felt like it was becoming theirs, not his or hers alone. But peace in the high country was always borrowed time. One bright afternoon, as Clara carried water from the creek, the sound of horses broke the hush. She froze. Two riders climbed the slope with the kind of swagger that turned her stomach cold. Her father and brother. They hadn't come empty-handed. Fresh coats, new boots, and the stench of liquor followed them. "Well, if it ain't the runaway," her brother drawled, swinging from the saddle. "Looks like you've been playing house with the hermit." Her father dismounted slower, but his eyes burned the same. "Words got around. Miner and Prescott promised a string of cattle if we bring back what's ours." Clara clutched the bucket tighter. "I'm not yours." "Girl," her father snapped, stepping closer. "Blood's blood. You're a debt to be paid." Elias appeared from the doorway, axe in hand, his stance calm but unshakable. He didn't raise the blade, he only planted it in the earth before him. "She stays if she wants. You got no claim past her choice." Her brother laughed. "Choice? Since when's a daughter get to choose?" Clara felt the old fear tug at her ribs, the kind that once bent her shoulders and kept her silent. But the cabin stood behind her, walls she had helped lift, flowers she had planted, words she had written with her own hand. She set the bucket down and walked to the doorway, dirt streaking her palms, chin high. "I choose here," she said. Her father's mouth twisted. "You'd throw away your kin for scraps of timber?" "I'd throw away shame," she shot back. "I'd throw away being sold like stock." Her voice carried, stronger with each word. "This home may be small, but it's built on respect. And that's worth more than cattle." The clearing had drawn quiet. From the tree line, a handful of trappers and valley folk watched, men who had drifted in to trade or lend a hand with the roof. Their silence pressed heavy, witness to what was unfolding. Elias stood steady, arms crossed, letting her words carry the weight. Her brother's face flushed hot. He spat into the dirt. "We'll be back. You'll see. Pride bleeds slower than cuts." The two men mounted and rode off, dust curling behind them. Clara's knees trembled only after they were gone, and she caught herself against the doorframe. Elias pulled the axe free and set it aside. "You held your ground." Clara managed a shaky laugh. "Didn't feel like it." "Felt enough," he said, voice low but certain. The trappers drifted back to their work, but Clara noticed the looks exchanged, some nodding with respect, others whispering. Word would spread, as it always did. But for once, she didn't fear it. That evening, she sat by the fire, tracing her name on the slate board. The letters were steady now, almost elegant. Elias watched, whittling in silence. Finally she looked up. "If they come again, will you still stand with me?" He met her gaze, gray eyes unwavering. "Long as you keep choosing, I'll keep standing." The wind rattled the shutters, but inside the cabin felt solid. The past had ridden up the mountain, but for the first time, Clara had not bowed. She had spoken, and the world had heard. But courage spoken aloud doesn't put food on the table. When an early winter storm struck, it would take more than words to keep them alive. The high country always demanded more than it gave, but that year winter came too soon. By late October, snow fell heavy across the ridges, burying Clara's wildflowers and muting the world into silence. The cabin, newly finished, creaked under drifts of white. Smoke from the chimney was their only flag against the storm. Clara rose early each morning to split kindling, her breath clouding in the air. Elias worked longer than he should, setting snares, hauling wood, checking the line for elk. Supplies ran low fast, and the hunt grew harder with each storm. One evening, as dusk deepened, Clara heard boots stumble at the door. Elias leaned heavy against the frame, one hand pressed to his side. His coat was torn, blood dark against the fabric. Her heart leapt. What happened? "Elk," he rasped, easing down onto the bench. "Got too close. Antler caught me." Panic tightened her chest, but she forced her hands steady. "Let me see." She peeled back the coat, wincing at the gash across his ribs. Not deep enough to kill outright, but dangerous if left untended. "Fetch whiskey," he muttered. They had none, only boiled water and cloth. Clara swallowed hard. "I'll stitch it." Elias shook his head. "You've never—" "Then I'll learn tonight." Her fingers trembled as she threaded a needle, but determination steadied her. Each stitch tugged his flesh, each knot tied with whispered prayers. He gritted his teeth, never crying out, only gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. When it was done, Clara bandaged the wound and sat beside him, sweat dampening her brow. "You're not splitting wood for a while," she said firmly. Elias gave a faint smile through the pain. "Guess that means you are." And so she did. Through the storm, Clara hauled water from the frozen creek, splitting logs until her arms shook. She kept the fire alive, stirred beans slow to stretch what little food they had, and checked the snares with clumsy hands. Every task felt like more than survival. It was a vow, unspoken but binding. At night, Elias lay pale on the cot, breath ragged. Clara sat near the fire, feeding it logs, whispering to herself, "You're stronger than the mountain." He said so, stronger than the mountain. Days blurred into one another, the storm howling like a saw through timber. Yet inside the cabin, a strange warmth grew. Each time Elias stirred awake, Clara was there, wiping his brow, steady as the fire itself. One night, as the wind rattled the shutters, he whispered, "You've carried more than most men would." She pressed a damp cloth to his forehead. "You carried me first. I won't let go now." For the first time, he reached for her hand. His grip was weak, but the gesture was strong. "Clara, you're stronger than the mountain." Her eyes stung. She held his hand until sleep claimed him again. By late December, the snow began to ease. Elias's color returned slowly, his strength crawling back day by day. Clara stood on the porch, watching sunlight spill across the ridges, her heart swelling with something she had no name for. The mountain had tested them with cold, hunger, and blood, and together they had not broken. Inside, Elias sat propped by the fire, carving a small shape from pine. When Clara stepped in, brushing snow from her skirts, he held it up. "A bird, wings spread wide. For you," he said. She turned it in her hands, smiling through tired eyes. Then we both survived the storm. Spring would open the trails again, bringing strangers with ledgers and offers too tempting to ignore. When choice returned, it would test not her strength, but her heart. When spring finally broke the back of winter, the high country opened its arms again. Snowmelt ran down the ridges, creeks swelled, and wildflowers pushed up through thawing soil. Clara breathed it in like new life. Elias, though still mending, walked stronger each day. His side healed, though not without a limp. Together they rebuilt snares, patched the roof, and planted a small patch of beans and squash near the cabin. It was on one such morning that 3 prospectors rode into the clearing. Their mules jingled with gear, and their coats smelled of dust and town life. They dismounted with easy grins, the kind men wear when they've come with business on their lips. "Fine cabin you've got here," the tallest said, tipping his hat toward Clara. "Word is you've got learning now. That true?" Clara glanced at Elias, who gave a small nod. "I can read some," she admitted. The man smiled. "We've struck a claim near the lower valley. Need someone to keep ledgers, mark deliveries, count provisions. Hard work, but steady pay, warm roof, no shortage of supplies. Would be the first time in these parts a woman took that job. You'd be making history." Clara's breath caught. To be wanted for her mind, offered a role no woman had held before, it was more than she had dared dream. Elias stayed silent, watching her face. He didn't step forward, didn't answer for her. The men pressed. "Think on it, miss. Life down there is easier than scratching at mountain soil. You wouldn't be beholden to no one." After they left, silence settled heavy. Clara sat on the steps, staring at the flowers just breaking the soil. The offer rang in her ears, steady pay, a place in history. Elias finally spoke. "Choice is yours." He disappeared into the cabin and returned with a thin slice of pine. With his knife, he carved lines, one trail leading down to the valley, another curling back up the ridge. He marked the crossing clear. He placed the board in her hand. "Here's the easy way down, and here's the way back. If you ride free. If you return the same. I won't hold you by need, Clara, only by choice." She turned the board over and over, the map simple but sharp. "And if I go? Then I'll keep the cabin standing," he said quietly. "And if you come back, it'll still be yours to walk into." Her chest ached with the weight of it. Freedom was what she had craved all her life, and now it sat heavy in her palm. Freedom to leave, freedom to stay. That night, she lay awake listening to the creek outside, the spring wind whispering against the shutters. She imagined herself in the valley, ledger book in hand, folk tipping hats at her as if she'd broken some barrier. Yet she also pictured the cabin's rough-hewn door, the flowers along the step, Elias's quiet presence across the fire. At dawn, she packed a small bundle, saddled the mule, and tucked the wooden map into her pocket. Elias didn't ask questions. He only helped tighten the girth strap, his face unreadable. "You'll find your road," he said. Clara rode to the valley trail. Dust rose beneath the mule's hooves. At the fork, she stopped. One road sloped down easy, promising warmth, pay, recognition. The other curved back into the pines, into the quiet strength she had come to know. She sat long in the saddle, the map pressed in her palm, her heart pounding with the weight of choosing. The road would test her heart. Dust lifting at the fork, Clara had to decide, ride on to the valley or turn back to the cabin and the man who waited without chains. The fork in the trail held Clara longer than she expected. Dust lifted from the mule's hooves, drifting into the pale morning light. One road sloped down toward the valley, where warm roofs and steady pay waited. The other curled back into the timbered ridge, to the cabin she had helped raise, and the man who had given her nothing but choice. She held the carved pine map in her hand until her fingers smudged it dark. Her heart tugged in both directions. But at last, she turned the mule's head. When the cabin clearing came into view, Elias was splitting kindling. He paused, axe resting on his shoulder. Clara slid from the saddle, pressed the wooden map into his hand, and said, breathless but sure, "I'm where I want to live." He studied her face for a long moment, gray eyes steady. Then he tucked the map into his pocket without a word. The silence between them felt heavier than speech, like a vow already spoken. Days after her return, news spread fast. Trappers carried word down the trail, and by the next Sunday neighbors gathered under the tall pine near the cabin. They came with baskets of bread and jars of pickled beans, children darting between them. Some had come curious, others skeptical, but all stayed when Clara stood at a small table inside the doorway. She took a slate and chalk, writing letters for the neighbor children. "This is your name," she told one small boy, shaping the strokes with patience. The boy's mother wiped her eyes with her apron. Others leaned close, whispering. Soon the doorway filled with faces, women, children, even men who nodded approval. The trappers who had once only watched in silence now offered firewood and help patching the roof. Respect, once scarce as game in winter, began to settle around the place like steady rain. Elias stayed in the background, repairing a fence rail, though Clara caught him watching. She realized he wanted this to be hers. Not his gift, but her claim. That knowledge made her stand taller, her voice stronger. When the hymn singing began under the pine, Clara joined, her voice carrying through the valley. Elias's baritone wove low beneath hers. For the first time, she wasn't singing to be heard or judged. She was singing because she belonged. After the meal, a neighbor leaned close. "Word is your kin tried to trade you for cattle. Folks are saying it loud now." Clara's pulse quickened, but she lifted her chin. "Let them say it. I'll stand here and prove otherwise." The woman's eyes softened. "You already have." That evening, when the last wagon rolled away, the clearing felt different, less hidden, more part of a larger world. Clara swept the floor of the cabin, while Elias stacked the baskets of leftover food. She broke the quiet at last. "When I stood at that road, I thought of easy pay, warm beds, being called something rare. But then I thought of here, of you waiting with the fire, of words I've learned on these boards, of neighbors willing to let me teach their children. That's worth more than any ledger." Elias looked up from the basket. "So long as you keep choosing it, it'll keep being yours." She smiled faintly, heart steady. "Then I'll keep choosing." The pine trees whispered in the night wind, carrying her words into the dark. The valley had heard her voice once. Now it would keep hearing. But choices don't stay private for long. Under the pine, vows would soon be spoken, a wooden ring carved, and the town itself called to witness. By midsummer, the clearing under the tall pine was no longer just a place for hymn singing and neighbor talk. It had become a gathering spot where Clara taught children their letters and Elias carved benches for weary mothers. Respect, once tentative, had begun to take root. So when word spread that vows would be spoken under that same pine, folks came from miles around. Clara woke early the morning of the gathering. She slipped into a dress she had stitched together from flour sacks, seams neat though the fabric bore its humble origin. She braided her hair and tucked wildflowers along the strands. Looking into the small shard of mirror Elias had traded for last winter, she whispered to her reflection, "I am not for sale. I am here by choice." Outside, Elias planed a final plank for the table, where neighbors would lay bread and jars of preserves. He wore his best, though best meant a clean shirt and boots freshly oiled. From his pocket he drew a carved wooden ring, whittled smooth, the grain catching the morning light. He turned it once in his hand, then slipped it back. By midday, wagons lined the clearing. Families spread quilts on the grass. Children chased each other between the pines. Clara felt her knees shake, but when she saw the faces, neighbors who had once whispered now smiling openly, her fear eased. Reverend Miller stood beneath the pine, Bible in hand. "We're not gathered for spectacle," he said, his voice carrying. "We're gathered because two souls have built a home on respect, not barter, and that deserves witness." Clara stepped forward, her bare feet brushing pine needles. Elias met her halfway, eyes steady. When he spoke, his words were simple. "I vow to honor what you choose, each day, even if it changes. My home is yours because it is ours." Her throat tightened, but she found her voice. "I vow to stand with you in storms, to keep this place alive not because I must, but because I will. Respect freely given, that's the home I choose." Elias slid the wooden ring onto her finger. The crowd broke into cheers, hats lifted high, children clapping. For a moment, even the trees seemed to hold still. As the meal began, Clara caught sight of a prospector arriving late, dust thick on his coat. He leaned close to Elias with a quiet word. The man who had once promised her kin cattle for her return had left the territory broke. His schemes collapsed. Clara exhaled. Cruelty, it seemed, had found no buyer. That night, after neighbors departed and lanterns flickered out, Clara sat on the steps of the cabin, her new ring glinting in the firelight. Elias joined her, settling beside her in silence. She leaned against his shoulder. "I thought I'd never stand before people and speak my own vow. Today I did." He nodded, gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "And they believed you. That matters." She smiled faintly. "It matters most that you did." The pine whispered above them, carrying the sound of distant crickets. The vows had been spoken, but Clara knew they weren't just for one day. They were for each morning she chose the cabin. Each evening she lit the fire. The world might still hold storms, but tonight there was peace, and it had been freely chosen. But vows are only beginnings. The cabin would soon swell with children learning letters, and a hidden spring behind the ridge would prove that second chances could feed a whole valley. By autumn, the cabin no longer felt like a lonely outpost. It had become something larger. Children now came up the trail with slates and chalk, mothers trailing behind with baskets of eggs or jars of corn. Inside, Clara's small table had become a school desk. The walls echoed not with silence, but with voices trying out their names, stumbling through letters, laughing when they got them right. Elias had built shelves along the wall, planed smooth and square. Books, traded from passing travelers, sat on them like treasures. Clara drafted lessons by lamplight, her handwriting steadier with each page. What began as her own halting attempt to claim words had turned into a gift she now passed on freely. The vows she and Elias had spoken under the pine carried into every corner of the room. Respect filled the air, not just between them, but between the children who helped one another, and the neighbors who now spoke of the cabin not as that hermit's place, but as the schoolhouse. Late one afternoon, while Elias repaired a fence, Clara wandered behind the ridge to gather berries. There she found a seep bubbling through the rocks, clear and cold. When Elias tested it, he realized it was a spring, steady enough to water a garden, maybe even a small field. Together they dug a channel, lined it with stone, and watched water run for the first time beside the cabin. Soon, squash and beans grew stronger, rows of green standing against the valley's harshness. The spring became a second chance carved into the earth, a quiet reminder that even barren places could give life if treated with patience. One evening, after the children had gone home and the sun painted the mountains red, Clara stood in the doorway. She looked at the garden fed by the spring, the shelves Elias had built, the ring of wildflowers still clinging to life along the step. The schoolhouse light glowed warm behind her, spilling into the dusk. She turned to Elias. "Do you ever think about how far we've come from Dusty Creek?" He leaned on the doorframe, silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I think about it every time I hear a child spell their name. You were the first to claim yours. Now they're following." Clara touched the wooden ring on her finger. "It started with choice. That's what changed everything." Elias nodded. Choice and the work to keep it. The lantern flickered, and the sound of laughter drifted faint from down the valley. Clara felt a swell of peace. Once, she had been nothing more than a debt to be bartered. Now, she was wife, teacher, builder, proof that respect and second chances could turn wilderness into home. And maybe that's the heart of it, when someone finally gives you the right to choose. What kind of home would you build with it? Share your thoughts below, and if you believe in stories of respect, mercy, and second chances, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Under the pine, vows had been spoken. In the schoolhouse, letters now bloomed. And beside the cabin, water ran steady from a hidden spring. Dusty Creek had once been a place of shame. Now, it was a place of light.